At 7:30 a.m. on September 18, 1944, Private First Class Arthur Jackson flattened himself against a jagged coral ridge on Polilliu Island while streams of Japanese machine gun fire ripped through the Marine's position to his left. He was only 19 years old. He had spent 3 days on the island without a single confirmed kill. Across the southern peninsula, the Japanese had established a crescent-shaped line of 12 reinforced concrete pillboxes, each packed with anywhere from 5 to 35 defenders. 3 days before, the 1st Marine Division had stormed Polilliu expecting the battle to end within 4 days. Major General William Rupertus assured his troops the island would be secured by the weekend. Instead, the fighting would drag on for more than 70 days. Nearly 1,300 Marines had already been killed or wounded during the first day alone. The Japanese had abandoned their earlier tactics. There were no reckless banzai charges anymore, no suicidal rushes into American gunfire. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had transformed Polilliu into a fortress. Nearly 10,000 defenders waited inside caves, tunnels, and hardened bunkers linked by hundreds of yards of underground passages. They allowed the Americans to advance directly into carefully prepared kill zones. By September 18, the 1st Marine Regiment had suffered 70% casualties. 7 out of every 10 Marines who landed with the regiment were dead or wounded. Jackson served with the 7th Marines, which had pushed into the island's southern sector. Their objective sounded simple enough: eliminate the Japanese strongpoints blocking the drive toward the airfield. The real obstacle was the pillboxes. Japanese engineers had embedded them deep into the coral ridges, surrounding them with walls nearly 3 feet thick. Each bunker supported the others with overlapping fields of fire. Any attack against one position exposed Marines to deadly crossfire from neighboring fortifications. The Marines had already tried grenades. They bounced harmlessly away from the concrete walls. Rifle fire achieved nothing except sparks and ricochets. Several Marines attempted direct assaults against the firing slits and died in heaps at the base of the bunkers. That morning, Jackson's platoon advanced roughly 200 yards before the entire left flank came to a halt. One particularly large pillbox dominated the approach. Every movement drew immediate machine gun fire. The Marines could neither advance nor safely retreat. 3 men had already died trying to flank the position. Normally, Marines would call for tanks or artillery to destroy a bunker like this. But Polilliu's terrain made that impossible. The steep coral ridges prevented tanks from maneuvering into the area, and artillery fire risked killing the Marines pinned down directly in front of the target. Someone would have to cross 150 yards of exposed coral, reach the bunker, and destroy it at point-blank range. The Japanese defenders would see the attacker the entire way. They had rifles, grenades, and multiple machine guns waiting. The odds were horrifying. Under combat conditions, a man sprinting across open ground moved at about 15 yards per second. Crossing 150 yards meant roughly 10 full seconds under fire. A Japanese Type 92 machine gun could fire 450 rounds per minute. In those 10 seconds, one machine gun alone could unleash around 75 bullets into the kill zone. The bunker had at least 2 of them. Nobody believed a Marine could survive that run. The officers understood it. The sergeants understood it. Jackson understood it too. But Jackson also knew something else. Every minute his platoon remained pinned down meant more Marines dying in front of those concrete walls. The left flank had to move or the entire advance would fail. Waiting for a perfect solution was simply another form of death. Jackson slammed a fresh 20-round magazine into his Browning automatic rifle. Then he stuffed his pockets with every grenade he could carry. Ahead of him stretched 150 yards of open coral and a bunker packed with 35 Japanese soldiers. The tropical heat already pushed past 100 degrees. And Arthur Jackson had just made the decision to attempt something that should have been impossible. He never asked permission. He never checked with his sergeant. He didn't coordinate with nearby Marines. He simply rose from cover and charged. The bar weighed nearly 19 pounds fully loaded. Jackson carried it at hip level while sprinting across the coral. The weapon could fire 550 rounds per minute. Accuracy didn't matter. Suppression did. The Japanese immediately spotted him. Their machine guns swung toward the lone Marine racing across the open ground. Bullets snapped past his face while fragments of coral exploded around his boots. Jackson never slowed down. He squeezed the bar's trigger and sprayed fire directly into the bunker's firing slit. His rounds could not penetrate the concrete, but they forced the enemy gunners to duck long enough to buy him precious seconds. The distance rapidly disappeared. 100 yards. 80 yards. 60 yards. His magazine emptied. Jackson dove behind a coral boulder, rammed in another magazine, and sprinted again. By now the Japanese had recovered and intensified their fire. Coral dust burst around his legs as rounds struck inches away. 40 yards. 30 yards. 20 yards. At close range, the design of the pillbox worked against its own defenders. The narrow firing slits provided excellent coverage at distance but created blind spots directly beside the openings. Jackson reached one of those blind spots. The Japanese could hear him outside the wall, but they could no longer aim at him. Jackson carried more than ammunition. He had white phosphorus grenades, fragmentation grenades, and another Marine following behind him brought 40 pounds of plastic explosive. White phosphorus ignites instantly when exposed to air and burns at temperatures exceeding 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Water cannot extinguish it. Jackson yanked the pin from his first phosphorus grenade and shoved it through the firing slit. The screaming began immediately. Japanese soldiers burst from the bunker with their uniforms engulfed in flames. Ammunition belts detonated around their bodies as they stumbled outside. Jackson cut them down with his bar before they could even shoulder their rifles. But dozens of soldiers still remained inside. Some retreated deeper into the bunker. Others resumed firing through secondary openings. Jackson grabbed the satchel containing 40 pounds of composition C2 explosive. The fuse would burn for only 30 seconds. He had one chance. He jammed the entire explosive charge through the main firing slit and ran. Jackson hurled himself into a shell crater, curled into a fetal position, covered his head, and pressed against the coral. The explosion ripped the bunker apart. Concrete slabs, shattered logs, and human remains blasted nearly 60 feet into the air. The shockwave slammed into Jackson's crater while debris rained down around him. A chunk of concrete the size of a football crashed beside his head. When the smoke cleared, the pillbox no longer existed. All 35 Japanese defenders were dead. Jackson staggered to his feet, ears ringing and hands trembling. He was still alive. And farther ahead, 11 more pillboxes continued firing into the Marine lines. Most men would have returned to their platoon after destroying a bunker like that. Jackson did the opposite. He reloaded his bar, checked his remaining grenades, and moved toward the next pillbox. The second bunker sat about 80 yards northwest of the first. Smaller than the original position, it held 5 Japanese soldiers and 2 machine guns. This time the defenders were alert. They had witnessed the destruction of the first bunker and knew an American Marine was coming. Jackson used the terrain to his advantage. The jagged coral ridges created natural corridors and blind approaches between positions. After 3 days on Peleliu, he understood where the Japanese fields of fire overlapped and where gaps existed. He crawled the final 30 yards on his stomach. The defenders heard movement and began blindly tossing grenades over the bunker wall. Jackson counted the explosions, waited for the pause between throws, then moved again. Once pressed against the concrete wall, he realized he had exhausted his phosphorus grenades. But he still carried fragmentation grenades and his bar. More importantly, he had learned something valuable from the first attack. Japanese pillboxes used narrow ventilation shafts in the roof to vent smoke and fumes. The openings were too small for grenades, but large enough for a rifle barrel. Jackson climbed onto the roof. He located the shaft and shoved the muzzle of his bar inside. Then he emptied an entire magazine directly into the bunker below. The .30 caliber rounds ricocheted wildly through the confined concrete chamber. Japanese soldiers died instantly. Jackson reloaded and fired another full magazine into the darkness. When he climbed back down, the bunker had fallen silent. 2 pillboxes destroyed. 10 remained. The third and fourth bunkers supported each other perfectly. Any Marine assaulting one would immediately come under fire from the other. Standard Japanese doctrine relied on exactly that kind of overlapping defense. Jackson solved the problem through sheer precision. Between the 2 pillboxes existed a narrow dead zone only 8 feet wide where neither bunker could fire effectively. If he strayed even slightly, one side or the other would cut him apart. He sprinted directly through the corridor. Before the defenders could reposition their guns, Jackson jammed the bar into the third bunker's firing slit and fired until the weapon clicked empty. Then he shoved his final fragmentation grenade through the opening. Without hesitation, he rushed to the fourth bunker and repeated the process. 4 pillboxes destroyed. Roughly 55 Japanese soldiers killed. Jackson had been fighting less than 20 minutes. His bar overheated repeatedly and jammed twice. The barrel burned his hands through the wooden foregrip. His ammunition was nearly gone. He had no grenades left. Any reasonable man would have fallen back to resupply. But Jackson noticed something through the smoke. Marines from his platoon had begun advancing behind him. His assault was working. The defensive line was breaking apart. If he stopped now, the remaining bunkers would pin those Marines down exactly the way his platoon had been trapped earlier. He checked his ammunition. 3 magazines remained. 60 rounds total. 8 pillboxes still stood. The numbers no longer mattered. Jackson kept moving. The 5th pillbox differed from the others. It included a concealed rear tunnel entrance connected to the Japanese defensive network. American troops often attacked bunkers from blind spots near the flanks, so Japanese engineers built escape routes and counterattack positions into many fortifications. Jackson didn't know that. He approached using the same tactics as before. But as he pressed against the bunker wall, a Japanese soldier suddenly emerged from a hidden tunnel 5 yards behind him with a bayonet-fixed rifle. Jackson spun and fired from the hip. The bar round struck the soldier in the chest and hurled him backward into the tunnel entrance. The gunfire alerted the defenders inside. Jackson heard shouting and movement echoing through the concrete structure. More soldiers were coming through the tunnel. Dropping to one knee, Jackson aimed directly into the narrow passage and opened fire. The confined tunnel funneled every bullet straight into the advancing Japanese troops. He emptied an entire magazine in 4 seconds, reloaded, and continued firing. When the shooting stopped, 3 Japanese soldiers lay dead in the tunnel entrance. The 5th pillbox went silent. 5 destroyed. 7 remained. But now the Japanese fully understood what was happening. Through their communication network, Colonel Nakagawa's command post tracked the destruction of the southern defensive line in real time. Reports poured in describing one American systematically annihilating bunker after bunker. Orders went out immediately: concentrate fire on the lone Marine. Jackson knew nothing about the Japanese response. He only knew the Marines behind him were finally advancing. The 6th pillbox occupied elevated ground atop a 15-foot coral ridge. It had perfect visibility in every direction. There would be no stealth this time. Jackson possessed only 1 magazine. 20 rounds. At that moment, a Marine rifle squad appeared to his right. Their sergeant quickly grasped the situation. Without discussion or planning, he simply pointed toward the bunker and charged. 7 Marines attacked from 2 directions at once. The Japanese focused on the larger group. Jackson exploited the distraction, climbing the ridge from its blind side. He located the ventilation shaft, shoved his bar inside, and fired every remaining round. The bunker fell silent. The rifle squad paid dearly for the assault. 1 Marine died and 2 others were wounded. Yet they kept advancing. Jackson examined his empty weapon and looked toward the 6 remaining pillboxes. For the first time since beginning his assault, he wasn't alone anymore. The Japanese counterattack came minutes later. Nakagawa dispatched 40 reserve soldiers through the tunnel network to restore the collapsing southern perimeter. Their orders were simple: kill the Marine responsible. Jackson meanwhile scavenged ammunition from the battlefield. Japanese rifle rounds were useless for his bar, but he collected grenades and magnetic mines from dead defenders. He also found an abandoned M1 Garand beside one of the bunkers. The Garand used the same .30 caliber ammunition as the bar. Jackson stripped rounds from the rifle's clips and manually loaded them into empty bar magazines. Slow, exhausting work, but eventually he managed to reload 40 rounds. 3 surviving Marines from the rifle squad joined him. Together they prepared to attack the 7th pillbox when the Japanese reserves appeared. 40 enemy soldiers emerged from a tunnel 200 yards north in disciplined formation. No screaming charges. No reckless assault. Just trained infantry advancing methodically through the coral ridges. The Marines opened fire first. Jackson fired short, controlled bursts. 5 rounds. Pause. 5 rounds. Pause. Every bullet mattered. Japanese troops scattered for cover while others continued pushing forward. The firefight intensified rapidly. Coral fragments sprayed Jackson's face as bullets cracked overhead. The Marines beside him fired aimed shots from their Garands while empty clips pinged onto the rocks. Still, the Japanese kept advancing. Jackson's first magazine emptied. He loaded his final 20 rounds. The Marines around him were nearly out of ammunition as well. Then explosions erupted behind the Japanese formation. 3 Marine rifle platoons had pushed through the gaps Jackson created and maneuvered behind the enemy reserves. 40 Marines suddenly opened fire into the rear of the Japanese force. The trapped defenders were annihilated between the 2 American groups. Within minutes, all 40 Japanese reserve troops lay dead across the coral. The southern defense line had collapsed completely. 6 pillboxes still remained, but now Jackson had ammunition, grenades, and Marines willing to follow him. Ahead stood the strongest position on the southern peninsula, 3 interconnected pillboxes arranged in a mutually supporting triangle. Roughly 30 Japanese soldiers defended the complex. Rifle pits and trenches linked every bunker together. Normally such a position required naval bombardment, artillery, or airstrikes before any infantry assault. None of those options were available. So 43 Marines prepared to storm the triangle using rifles, grenades, and sheer aggression. Jackson organized the assault in under 2 minutes using only hand signals. He divided the Marines into 3 groups, assigning 1 pillbox to each force. He personally chose the center bunker, the largest and most dangerous position. The Marines attacked at 8:47 a.m. They had already been fighting for more than an hour beneath brutal tropical heat exceeding 105 degrees. Several men showed signs of heat exhaustion. Nobody stopped. Jackson's group sprinted across 60 yards of open ground toward the central bunker. Japanese machine guns erupted midway through the charge. 2 Marines fell almost instantly. The survivors kept running. Jackson reached the wall first. He pulled the pin on a captured Japanese grenade, counted briefly, and tossed it through the firing slit. 1 machine gun fell silent. The second kept firing. Another grenade. Another explosion. Silence. Jackson climbed onto the roof, found the ventilation shaft, and emptied his bar into the darkness below. Screams echoed through the concrete chamber before finally stopping. The central bunker was dead. To his left, Marines destroyed another pillbox using a satchel charge. On the right flank, however, the final bunker still held out fiercely. Jackson immediately sprinted toward it through heavy fire. A bullet sliced across his thigh, but he never slowed down. Reaching the blind side of the bunker, he located the ventilation shaft and dropped his final grenades into the opening. Both detonated inside. The third bunker fell silent. The triangle position collapsed in less than 4 minutes. But Jackson was bleeding badly. Blood soaked his trousers as his wounded leg weakened beneath him. Ahead remained the final 3 pillboxes separating the Marines from complete control of the southern peninsula. A Marine sergeant tried to send Jackson to an aid station. Jackson pulled away and kept walking south. He wasn't finished yet. The 10th pillbox fell at 9:12 a.m. The 11th collapsed at 9:21 after Jackson and another Marine placed a satchel charge against the structure. The 12th and final bunker overlooked the beach where the Marines had landed 3 days earlier. Its machine guns had already killed numerous Americans during the battle. By then Jackson could barely walk. Blood loss blurred his vision while the blazing heat distorted the coral ridges around him. 3 Marines accompanied him for the final assault, one carrying grenades, another a flamethrower, and the third extra bar ammunition. At 100 yards, the Japanese opened fire. The supporting bar gunner laid down suppressive fire while Jackson advanced with the flamethrower operator. At 50 yards, the flamethrower Marine stepped into range. Jackson covered him with controlled bursts despite collapsing onto one knee from pain. The flamethrower roared. Burning fuel poured through the bunker's firing slit. The screams lasted only seconds. At 9:33 a.m., the final pillbox fell silent. Jackson collapsed beside a coral boulder, drenched in blood and exhaustion. His bar rested across his lap, its barrel still scorching hot. In roughly 90 minutes, Private First Class Arthur Jackson had destroyed 12 Japanese pillboxes and killed approximately 50 enemy soldiers. His assault shattered the southern defensive line and transformed the battle for that entire sector of Peleliu. Navy corpsmen treated him moments later. The bullet in his thigh missed bone and arteries. He would survive, and astonishingly, only 3 days later, he returned to combat despite still limping. Stories of the assault spread rapidly through the 7th Marines. Officers who witnessed the battle described a single Marine systematically destroying fortifications that normally required entire companies to eliminate. Reports moved quickly up the chain of command. Eventually, Arthur Jackson's name reached Admiral Chester Nimitz himself. The Medal of Honor recommendation advanced unusually fast. On October 5, 1945, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Jackson's neck at the White House. The citation detailed every bunker destroyed and every act of extraordinary bravery during the 90-minute assault. After the war, Jackson returned to Oregon. He carried home a permanent limp, haunting memories, and the nation's highest military decoration. For decades, he rarely spoke about Peleliu. He married, raised a family, and worked quietly for the Postal Service in Portland. Most neighbors never realized the quiet mail carrier had once charged 12 Japanese pillboxes almost single-handedly. Jackson remained in military service through the reserves, eventually transferring to the Army Reserve and serving during the Korean War era. He rose to the rank of captain but almost never discussed the events on Peleliu. In 1961, while stationed at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, Jackson became involved in a deadly confrontation with a Cuban worker suspected of espionage. Jackson killed the man in self-defense, but the incident haunted him for years. He later remarked that killing 50 enemy soldiers in wartime earned him the Medal of Honor, while killing one man at Guantanamo brought only silence and controversy. Jackson eventually retired after 40 years of combined military service. Later in life, he finally began speaking publicly about courage, fear, combat, and survival. He visited schools and veterans organizations, sharing stories about the men who never returned home. In 2011, at age 86, Jackson visited the USS Peleliu, LHA-5, named after the battle where he earned his medal. Standing before more than 1,000 sailors and Marines, he spoke about the brutal fighting, the pillboxes, and the Marines who died beside him. Arthur Jackson was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from Peleliu. On June 14, 2017, he died in Boise, Idaho, at the age of 92. Marines carried his remains with full military honors during his burial at the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery. On September 18, 1944, 50 Japanese soldiers tried to stop one 19-year-old Marine. None of them survived. Arthur Jackson lived another 73 years.